theme of the entire biblical narrative. That marvelous promise God made Abraham as a relation to the scheme of redemption. Importance of the study in comprehending the redemption theme is shown by Willis J. Beecher in his excellent book, The Prophets and the Promise. He has stated the main line of the Old Testament recorded for a purpose that which presents the history of Israel. Properly, this begins with the account of the calling of Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees, as found in the 12th century of Genesis, contents of the preceding 11 chapters being preliminary. Dismissing these preliminary chapters, we turn to the calling of Abraham, and there begin our search for the main line of Messianic doctrine, both the beginning and afterward. We should find it to be the principal thing in the Old Testament. This particular study seeks to trace the development of that promise.
Now the promise is started in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. When God said, I'm going to put enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will bruise your head, you will bruise his heel. That was the very first hint of something coming. Now, starting in Genesis chapter 12, we have that being expanded. There's going to be a nation come from Abraham. There's going to be land given to him. And we're going to read tonight how that's going to happen. Go on, Eric.
Lesson text, Genesis 12, 1 through 7, and Genesis 15, 1 through 21. The lesson aim is to continue our tracing the seed line in Abraham through whom the redempted seed should come. Lesson preview. You will, number 1, review the promises given to Abraham in Genesis 12, 1 through 7. Number 2, trace the nation, land promises given to Abraham, Genesis 12, and review in Genesis 13 and 15. And number 3, study the circumstances and events that take place as God confirms the promise to Abraham and makes it into a covenant in Genesis 15.
Okay, we're going to look at actually 4 chapters of the book of Genesis tonight. It's going to give us the beginning of the promise and then repeat it, and then a covenant that's going to confirm it. And we'll discuss that covenant when we get to it. First, there's a nation land promise that God makes Abraham. He says, I'm going to give you a nation, I'm going to give you land. Now let's read that in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 2 and verse 7. Mark, would you read that, please?
Just 1 and 2 and 7?
1, 2, and 7.
Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing.
So there's the nation promise. God says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to make your name great, and you will be a blessing. That's the promise to Abraham. And then read verse 7, Mark.
Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, To your offspring I will give this land. So we built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him.
And then he says, I'm going to give you this land. You see the 2 parts of the promise there? He says, I'm going to give you a nation. A nation is going to come from... He doesn't have any kids yet. His wife is barren, and he is an old man, and they don't have any children yet. But God's telling him, I'm going to make of you a great nation of people. And then the land promise is going to be renewed in chapter 13, verses 14 through 18. Joanne, would you read that for us, please?
The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, Lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord.
Okay, the land promise was chapter 13, verses 14 and 15. He says, I'm going to give you the land that you're on. You can look as far as you can see any direction. I'm going to give this to you. And then he says in verse 18, he says, So Abraham moved his tents and went to live in the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. After he'd done all of this, he just settled. Do you see that? He's just settled here now.
Isn't it amazing that you think about, he has no children, he has no offspring, yet God says to him, your offspring are gonna be like the dust of the ground. You ain't gonna be able to count them all. It's like, how do you grasp something like that?
Absolutely. In 14 and 15, you see the land promise, and then you see the nation promise when he says that that I will make your offspring forever. I'll make your offspring like the dust of the earth. So that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. You see that?
Mhm.
He's repeated the covenant now to him. And then we're going to see this covenant renewed, and it's going to be made into a covenant between God and Abraham. And I want you to notice what God expects of Abraham and what God says he's going to do. All right? In this covenant process. Okay, let's read chapter 15, 1 through 21. Alana, you read 1 through 10. And Linda, Sandy, you read 11 through 21.
15. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. And Abraham said, O Lord God, what wilt thou give me, since I am childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus? And Abram said, Since you have given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, This man will not be your heir, but one who shall come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. And he took him outside and said, Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you are able to count them. And he said to him, So shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. And he said, O Lord God, how may I know that I shall possess it? So he said to him, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, and a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him, and cut them in two, and laid each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds.
Okay, God then renewed the land promise. Did you see that? He said, I'm going to give you this land. And Abraham says, how am I going to know that this is going to happen? How do I know that it's going to happen for me? And God says, I want you to get these things, a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a 3-year-old, and 2 birds, a pigeon and a turtle dove. And he says, I want you to get these animals. Now, we don't know yet what he's going to do with them, but we're going to discover that in a minute. Now, Sandy, would you read then starting in 11?
Yes. Then the birds of the prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Ammonites has not yet reached its full measure. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed through the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Raphaites, Amorites, Canaanites, and Girgashites, and Jebusites.
Okay. Now let's look at what has happened here. Abraham has been made a promise. God's told him, I'm going to give you a land, I'm going to give you a people, I'm going to make you a great nation, I'm going to bless all nations of the earth through you. And then Abraham says, how's that going to happen? How do I know that all of this is going to come true? And God says, get a calf, get a goat, get a sheep, and get a turtle dove and a pigeon. So he got all those animals, cut them in half, didn't cut the birds in half, cut the other animals in half and laid them each on the side of each other and made a path between them. Abraham then went to sleep at night. And during the daytime, he stayed awake and kept all the birds of prey off of the meat. But at night, he went to sleep. What did he see happen? What did he see happen?
The torch.
A torch and what?
Flaming pot.
A pot of flaming coals and a torch. And what did the torch do?
Pass between the pieces?
Pass between the pieces. Now, what is happening here, the two people who make the covenant walk between the pieces. And what they're saying is, let happen to me what has happened to these beasts if I don't keep this covenant. If I don't keep this covenant, I'll die. That's exactly what they're saying. Now, first, the flaming torch goes through. And the flaming torch represents who? God. That's God going through. And then the pot of coals goes through. Who's that?
Jesus.
Who's the pot of coals? God. What is God saying to Abraham? What's he saying? He's saying, I am going to keep this covenant with you. I will, if you break your part, I'll die for you. If I break my part, I'll die. So what's God saying to Abraham? I'm going to take the punishment for both of us. If I break the covenant, I'll take the punishment. If you break the covenant, I'll take the punishment. And what's God expect of Abraham? Be faithful. Just be faithful to me. All your descendants forever, be faithful to me. Well, was Abraham faithful to God?
Yes.
Yes.
Was he sinless?
No.
No. He wasn't, was he? But he was faithful. He wasn't sinless. He was faithful. Did Israel ever sin? Did his descendants ever sin?
Yes.
Absolutely. Did they reject him?
Yes.
Absolutely. And God is going to have to die for them. When does he do that?
Cross.
On the cross of Christ, when Jesus was crucified, at the very time that they were supposed to slit that goat's throat and put the blood of that goat on the other goat and send the goat up into
In the wilderness.
the wilderness where it was supposed to go for the sins of the people, when that goat's throat was slit that night, guess who died? The very same time Jesus died on the cross. That's very ironic, isn't it? That Christ would die right at the time when he says, I'm going to pay for all of Israel's sins, for everything that Israel's done. I'm taking the punishment for that. And he did that on the cross of Christ. What a wonderful blessing that is. Now, notice, let's turn to Jeremiah 34, 13 through 21 and read that. Jeremiah 34, 13 through 21. We'll see this as an explanation of this sacrifice that they've made there today. Somebody start in verse 13 and read through verse 21.
Jeremiah what now?
Jeremiah 34.
This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I made a covenant with your forefathers when I brought them out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I said, every 7th year, each of you must free any fellow Hebrew who has sold himself to you. After he has served you 6 years, you must let him go free. Your fathers, however, did not listen to me or pay attention. Recently you repented and did what is right in my sight. Each of you proclaimed freedom to his own countrymen. You even made a covenant before me in the house that bears my name. But now you have turned around and profaned my name. Each of you has taken back the male and female slaves you had set free to go where they wish. You have forced them to become your slaves again. Therefore, this is what the Lord says. How far?
21.
You have not obeyed me. You have not proclaimed freedom for your fellow countrymen. So now I now proclaim freedom for you, declares the Lord. Freedom to fall by the sword, plague, and famine. I will make you abhorrent to all the kingdoms of the earth. The men who have violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of the covenant they made before me, I will treat like a calf they cut in two and then walk between its pieces. The leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the court officials, the priests, and all the people of the land who walk between the pieces of the calf, I will hand over to the enemies who seek their life. Their dead bodies will become food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth. I will hand Zedekiah king of Judah and his officials over to their enemies who seek their lives, to the army of the king of Babylon, which has withdrawn from you.
Go ahead and read through the end of the chapter.
I am going to give the order, declares the Lord, and I will bring them back to this city. They will fight against it, take it, and burn it down. And I will lay waste the towns of Judah so no one can live there.
See, they had walked between the animal pieces, and God says they broke the covenant, they didn't keep it, they're going to die because of it. That's what happens when they make that covenant. God is saying, if I break my word in this covenant at all, if I don't keep the covenant, I will die. And if you don't keep the covenant, you don't keep your part of the covenant, I'll die for you, both. Now, you remember a passage in the New Testament that talks about heaping coals of fire upon somebody? You ever read that? Somebody find that passage.
Romans
Come on,
It's in
man.
Romans.
Come on. Bring it. Bring it, man.
12.
Yes.
Hey.
The last paragraph. You got
On
it,
the
man.
contrary,
You on.
This is verse 20. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. And then,
What do you think that's talking about? Heap burning coals upon
and
his head.
Proverbs says, "And the Lord will reward you."
Huh?
And the one in Proverbs 25 says the same thing, and he adds, "The Lord will reward you."
Right. And what does he say? What is happening there? What is the pot of fire, the pot of coals? I always thought it was like heaping burning coals on their head, making them feel really uncomfortable about it when I first read it. But that's not what's happening at all.
No.
The pot of coals comes from this passage in Genesis chapter 15.
Oh.
The pot of coals, the burning pot of coals passed between the clay, between the animals. That's God. And what Paul is saying, when you give them a cup of water, you're bringing God into this situation. You're bringing God upon them, and they're going to feel it. Isn't that something? Heaping burning coals on their head. You're bringing God into the situation. What a wonderful thing. Okay. Now,
In the sense
It
that
does.
we were unworthy, we were the enemies of God, and He brought us salvation.
That's
even
right.
though we were so evil.
absolutely, absolutely. Now let's look at the extent of the land that's to be received. Genesis 15, 18 through 21 tells the description of the land. Let's read that again. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt. What river is that? Huh? No, that's not the
Nile.
Euphrates
Nile
River is not
River.
the river of Egypt.
River.
No, that's not the Nile River either.
Really?
I'll show you the river. If you look in your Bible,
Is it the Euphrates?
huh?
Euphrates?
It's called,
Euphrates.
no, it's not the Euphrates. It's the Adi Elarish, and it's down here at the bottom of Israel, right here. This is called the River of Egypt, right there. It's the Wadi Elarish. It's down at the bottom of Israel. And it's the bottom of Israel's territory. After that, it goes into Egypt. And that's the river that divides them. So he's saying from that river, which is the Wadi Elarish, from there, I'm going to give you to the great river Euphrates. So from that river up to the river Euphrates, he's giving them all of that land. And it's going to be possessed by these people. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, the Perizzites, Raphaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Gergesites, and Jebusites. That's the land that God is going to give to Abram's descendants. But you notice, he says, I'm not going to give it to you right away. It's going to be, when does he say, I'm going to give it to you? How long is it going to take?
The sin of the Ammonites.
One of the Amorites.
Huh?
The sin of the Ammonites.
Well, the sin of the Ammonites has to get full before it happens, but when is it? When is that going to occur? 430 years from this day. 430 years. In Genesis here it says 400 years. It says that they will be mistreated 400 years there, and then they're going to be released. You see that in verse 13? So it's going to be 400 years. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says it was actually 430 years between that time and the time that they actually left the land.
There's a passage somewhere, I'm trying to remember where, but it says to the day.
Yes,
It was 430 years to the day.
there you go.
Yes.
To the very day.
That's how exact God was.
When God made the promise and then when it was fulfilled.
It wasn't even rounded up. It was just, it was purposed.
Yeah. Yes, it was. It was right to the day that God said, I'm going to do it. Now, God wouldn't give Abraham's seed the land while Abraham was yet alive. He's not going to do that. He's going to wait until he's died, and they'll come out in the fourth generation, verse 16. And in the fourth generation, they will come out, for the iniquity of the Ammonites is not yet full. The Ammonites are going to have to be punished. And God is waiting until their iniquity is full, and then he's going to bring Israel out. Israel is going to do the punishing of the Ammonites. And you're going to read that someday when you read about them going into the land of promise.
So why were they being punished?
Because of the wickedness that they had done. The Ammonites were a wicked people in God's eyes. And so he says, when their iniquity is full, then I'll bring you out. All right. Before the Abrahamic promise, the nation and the land could be fulfilled, Israel had to develop into a great nation
To the day.
down in Egypt.
Thank you.
So then God would give to Abraham's seed this great land in possession. But first, they had to wait until God accomplished his purpose in Egypt.
Wow.
Almost need to sneeze.
I wonder what that was.
Okay, Mark, read the summary.
Wow. This appearance of Jehovah to Abraham included the promise that Abraham's seed would dwell in a foreign land, Egypt, then return to the land of Canaan, which they would receive for a possession. It carefully details how much land area, the extent of land, that they would receive when they returned from Egypt. Then he confirmed his promises by passing his fire between the covenant sacrifices.
There you go. He confirmed his... That he read the last paragraph on page 15. The summary down there on page 15. Read it again, Mark, so that everybody can hear it.
This appearance of Jehovah to Abraham included the promise that Abraham's seed would dwell in a foreign land, Egypt, then return to the land of Canaan, which they would receive for a possession, and carefully details how much land area, the extent of land, that they would receive when they returned from Egypt. Then he confirmed his promises by passing his fire between the covenant sacrifices.
There you go. Now, let's just review quickly the twofold promise of God. The first part of the promise is I'm going to make you into a great nation. The second part of the promise is I'm going to give you this land. Now, the land is going to come 430 years later. It's going to come in the fourth generation, actually 430 years to the day. And God says to Abraham, if I don't keep my word in this, let what happens to me what happens to these beasts here that you just slaughtered, let that happen to me. And if you break your part of the covenant by not being faithful to me, I'll die for you. And so God passes through both times, through the pot, in the torch and in the pot of coals. Don't forget that, because that's very important. All right. There's the promise. Genesis is not just history. It is history, but it's telling a story, isn't it? It's telling about God's redeeming mankind. Starts in Genesis 3:15 saying, I'm going to send someone who's going to crush your head, Satan, and you're going to bruise his heel. And then comes down to Abraham and says, I'm making you into a great nation, and all nations on the earth are going to be blessed through your seed, which Paul said in Galatians 3 is Christ. So Genesis 1 through 15 is all about that promise. All about the promises that God is making to redeem mankind from sin. People wonder, why did God ever make man if he knew they were going to sin? Well, God knew man was going to sin. He knew man's nature. He knew what it was. And so God had to make a plan. You're seeing that plan unfold now. What a blessing this is. Well, next week, what's our lesson next week, Mark?
Yeah.
It is.